Hey, I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATVMC. In this video, we're going to show you how to replace your rear brake pads on your Yamaha Rhino. Changing your rear brake pads out is a really simple process to do. We're going to show you how to do it on this Yamaha Rhino 660. It's a similar process for the 450s as well. Now these two machines, they're unique because they have that rear rotor on the drive shaft. The 700s are not like that. They have the rear brakes next to the rear wheels. So keep that in mind. Now, while we're in there, we're going to show you how to inspect the rear brake pads to make sure you're making the right repair. And we're also going to be adjusting the rear parking brake. Now, throughout the process, you do want to refer to your model-specific service manual for more information and specs. To do this job, we're going to use some safety glasses, rubber gloves, rags. We also have our drain pan, a torque wrench, 5mm Allen, 12 and 17mm sockets. We're also using a chisel. Don't worry, we're not going to damage anything, but we're going to use this with our crescent wrench. We're also using a bungee cord and a toothbrush to help clean things up. For parts, we have our Tusk brake pads. If you go on our website, we have a lot of different options on there. We're also using some brake cleaner, and we might be using some grease to lube up a couple pins. To start out, we're going to raise the machine off the ground. Make sure you do that in a safe and secure manner. To inspect our brake pads, we're going to be looking at this metal backing on the brake pad itself and compare the distance from this backing to the rotor. So you can see this metal backing is right against the rotor. We're actually rubbing metal to metal. You do not want that. Typically, you want between 1.5 to 5mm of a gap between this metal piece and the rotor. So just to give you guys a better idea of what's going on with our brake pads, all this pad material is worn through and this inside edge is rubbing against our rotor. And the minimum spec in our manual is 1.5mm for this pad thickness. So if this metal backing starts to get close to the rotor, make sure you replace those pads before you ruin your rotor. So for us, we're actually going to be replacing the rotor as well. We're going to be doing a separate video on that. Since we need to replace our brake pads, we're going to remove that rear section of our skid plate. Now, we did remove our wheels as well. You do not have to do that. We just did it to better show the process. Before we remove the caliper, we need to loosen up these two caliper pins with our 5mm Allen socket. Now we can loosen up the two caliper mounting bolts. So you've got one right here on the bottom. It's a 14mm. Now for this top one, it's kind of hard to reach it, and if you do, it might be hard to get leverage on it. So I'm using a swivel extension, a 1-inch swivel extension, and a longer ratchet to break it free. Once it's free, I'm just going to use a regular ratchet, and you want to wait to remove both bolts until both of them are broken free. And then from there, we just need to remove both of these brake pad pins. After that, we can remove our brake pads. So we've got our brake pads on the bench right here. We did change out our rotor. If you need to know how to do that, make sure you check out that video. Now, with the brake pads, you can see one of these is glazed over, and if both of your pads look like that, then the machine's probably not going to stop that good. You'd want to replace those anyway. But for this one, we had uneven pad wear, and this other pad wore metal to metal to that rotor. And since we had uneven pad wear, we're going to want to inspect our caliper, make sure those slide pins aren't sticking. And then when we go to press our piston in, we want to make sure that it's not super hard to press in. If it is, you might have some corrosion around those seals, and you might need to rebuild your caliper as well. Now we're going to use brake cleaner and a toothbrush to clean up our brake caliper. So we're checking the movement of those caliper pins, and they're actually not too bad on this, but we'll just grease them real quick just to show you guys how. So we're going to pull this mounting bracket all the way out. We'll wipe these off and apply a new coat of grease. And you also want to inspect those rubber boots for any tears. Then we'll reinstall this onto the caliper and make sure the rubber boots pop all the way onto those pins. To get the piston to turn in, what we need to do is get an 8mm combo. We've got a clear hose. We're going to put that on the end of the bleeder nipple. We're going to crack that open. And then with that cracked open, we have that cross right there. We're going to turn that in with our chisel. We also have a crescent wrench on the end of our chisel. And we're going to turn that in until it's flush with the caliper body. So once this is all the way in, what we're going to do, this cross, we're going to line up one of these lines with the dot in that caliper body. So once you're there, you can go ahead and close up the bleeder nipple and remove our hose. We didn't have very much fluid come out at all, but there is a little bit, so just be aware of that. Now our new shims didn't have these shims on the back side. These are going to help with noise, so if you want to reuse these, then you want to pop them off the old pad and install them on the new pads. Once those are clipped onto place, we'll install these pads onto our machine. With the shims in place, we're going to install the new pads onto the caliper. So we're just going to swing that up in there. Now, one more thing I forgot to mention is that anti-rattle spring. Make sure that's still in place. And then these brake pad pins, if there's deep grooves in them, you want to get them replaced. These ones look all right. And when you put these pins in, it helps to push up on the pad just a little bit against that anti-rattle spring. We'll start with that outer pad and then install this inner pad. Then we'll screw the pins in, but we're going to do the final tightening once the caliper is all mounted up. So before we set the caliper in place, make sure those brake pads are fully spread apart so they can go over the rotor. So we'll get that lower mounting bolt installed first, and then the upper, and we'll torque them to 35 foot-pounds. Now we'll tighten down the two brake pin bolts. Now we can reinstall our skid plate. And then we'll reinstall our wheels. We're going to torque those lug nuts to 40 foot-pounds. Now that we have our machine lowered, we're going to remove both seats and the center console. Now for the parking brake adjustment, the main thing is to just make sure you have some free play in there. So what we're going to do is press down on our button and see how far this moves before we have any resistance. So we do have a little bit of free play. If you need less free play, what you're going to do is break that jam nut loose. So we've got a 10 and 12 millimeter open end wrench. Once that's broken loose, you can back this adjuster out. That's going to reduce free play. But if you get it too tight and you need more free play, then you can turn that adjuster in. Now, there is a measurement on this. So the manual tells us, you know, we want 2 to 3 millimeters of free play. So if you do decide to measure this, we're going to use our digital caliper, set it between 2 and 3 millimeters. So we're just below 3 right there. I'm going to lock it into place, and then I'm going to use the depth gauge on this other side. We're going to set that down by the cable end and actually measure how far, or see if that lever at the end is within that 2 to 3 millimeter range. You know, this is barely moving further than 3 millimeters. So I'm going to take a little slack out, double check it. So that right there is at 3 millimeters. We're going to go ahead and lock it down. Then we can reinstall that center console and the seats. The last thing you need to do is pump up your brakes, and then from there, just keep in mind the rear brake pads need to wear in, so they might not stop quite as well your first ride out. And from there, you should be good to go. If you need any brake parts or any other parts for your Rhino, check our website. We have a lot of different options on there. And if you want to see more helpful content like this, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.